Us humans are extremely lucky that we live in the world of regular integers, where something called the fundamental theorem of arithmetic holds, which means that there is one unique prime factorization for each integer. I mean, sure, you can take a number, say 210, and factorize it in two different ways, like 21 times 10 or 6 times 35, but both of those are broken down into primes in the exact same way, 2 times 3 times 5 times 7. And yeah, you could claim a different factorization exists if you write the factors in a different order, or if you keep multiplying by 1 until the heat death of the universe, but the fact is, all of these are the same, and there's one unique way to factorize 210. There's no prime factorization for it that is 11 times something, for example. But this property is obvious, right? I mean, that's just how numbers work. That's why prime numbers exist. That's how they work. Can you even conceive numbers where this doesn't work? Welcome to the wonderful world of non-unique factorization domains. It's quite a mouthful, but it refers to those metaphorical, shady alleyways of maths where the fundamental theorem of arithmetic doesn't hold. At least, not in the sense you're used to. Say hello to the integers adjoin square root minus 5. It's written like this, and it's a ring, just like the normal integers, consisting of all of the possible numbers in the form a plus b root minus 5, where a and b are normal integers. So that includes 3 plus 2 root minus 5, 1 plus 7 root minus 5, 21, 4 root minus 5, and so on and so forth. Now, even though the numbers look a little different, the notion of prime numbers still exists. A number is prime when it dividing the product of two numbers means it divides one of said numbers. Symbolically, you write this out like this. Now, I'm going to guess that that isn't the definition you're expecting. You're expecting a number to be prime if its only factors are 1 and itself. This property is actually known as irreducibility, and right off the bat we've encountered the first and weird thing about non-UFDs, and that is that irreducibility doesn't imply primeness. The second weird thing is the number 6. Yeah, I'm looking at you, buddy. Because not only can 6 be written as 2 times 3 in this ring, as it can in the standard ring of integers, it can also be written as 1 plus root minus 5 times 1 minus root minus 5. And these four numbers, 2, 3, and 1 plus or minus the square root of minus 5, are all irreducible, meaning that the factorization stops there. It's not like the case we had for 210, where both of the factorizations ultimately decompose into the same thing. These are two genuinely unique, different ways of writing the number 6 in this funky ring. We will talk about the way to quote-unquote fix this in a second, but the first, much more important thing to address is why does this matter? When will this ever be more than some trivial trivia and actually make a difference? Last video we looked at Lamé's proof of Fermat's last theorem, and as a number of you correctly realized, this proof is flawed and false. And the reason it doesn't work is because the ring of cyclotomic integers, which we were working in, isn't a unique factorization domain. But hang on, how does that break the proof? Well, it's this step here where we have z to the p equals k to the p times d0 times d1 all the way up to di, and we say that because all the di's are pairwise coprime and they share no common factors, they must all be p-th powers themselves. And in the regular integers, we'd be absolutely correct. If we simplify it slightly and say we had 36, 6 squared, is equal to d1 times d2, which are coprime, then the only non-trivial solution is 4 times 9, which is 2 squared times 3 squared. So we have the p-th powers as required. But in a non-UFD like z adjoin root minus 5, look what can happen. On top of the factorizations we already had, we can get these ones too. Now, again, we have some solutions that aren't coprime, some that are squares like we want, but look at those bottom two. Those two numbers don't share any factors, they're coprime, and yet neither of them is a square number. And a similar issue arises, not in all rings of cyclotomic integers, but an infinite number of them, so Lamé's proof was wrong. And this wasn't some revelation that came a decade later, no, people knew this from basically day one, but it did inspire the closest thing we have to a solution. As a reminder, our problem is that we have two perfectly valid, perfectly distinct factorizations of a given number. Now, ideally, we'd summon some DLC numbers, as it were, so that both factorizations secretly decompose into the same thing, just like 210 did. But first, you need to understand what the heck a ring actually is, because the fact we're dealing with a ring is absolutely essential here. Rings are a type of algebraic structure, consisting of a set of elements and two operations, which are usually referred to as addition and multiplication, even though they don't actually have to be addition and multiplication. Now in our case it just so happens that they will be those two, but they could be anything like function composition or rotation or reflection. Now we have our long list of conditions. A ring must be an abelian group under addition, which means that it's closed. So for all A and B in the ring, A plus B is also in the ring. It's associative, basically it doesn't matter where you stick the brackets. It's commutative, so A plus B equals B plus A. There's an identity element such that A plus E is equal to A, and there are inverses for each element such that A plus A inverse is equal to E, the identity element. And then the multiplicative operation has to be closed, associative, and distributive over the addition. So for any A, B, C in your ring, A times B plus C is equal to B plus C times A, which is equal to AB plus AC. And now we introduce the star of the show, an ideal of a ring. An ideal is defined as a subset of the elements of the ring that satisfies the following two properties. It has to be an additive subgroup, and for any element R in the ring, and any element A in the ideal, A times R is in the ideal, and R times A is also in the ideal. Which is to say that if you multiply an element in the ideal by any other element in the ring, you end up back with an element in your ideal. For example, if you had the ring of integers, an example of an ideal would be this one here. These are just the multiples of 3, and we can very quickly verify that they satisfy both requirements of the ideal. If you add any two of them together, you get another element in the ideal. For example, 6 plus minus 3 is equal to 3. And if you multiply any integer by a multiple of 3, you get another multiple of 3. So our second requirement is also satisfied. In fact, this specific ideal is quite a special ideal for two reasons. Firstly, it's an example of an ideal generated by an element, which is defined as the smallest possible ideal containing a given element. So if our generator is 3, our ideal starts with just the element 3. But for the ideal to be an additive subgroup, it needs an identity element, so we need to add the element 0. And we also need to have inverses, so we need to add the element minus 3. And then for closure purposes, we need to have 3 plus 3 and minus 3 plus minus 3 there, so we need 6 and minus 6. But then that means we need to include 3 plus 6, so we add 9, and so on and so forth until we have all the multiples of 3. These ideals, like 3, are generated by just one element, and so are called principal ideals. But you can also have ideals generated by multiple elements. Staying in the integers just a little bit longer, I want you to consider the ideal 20, 45. By our definition, we know that this is the smallest possible ideal containing both 20 and 45. And if we apply the same logic as before with this having to be an additive subgroup, what you'll find is that this ideal contains all of the integers in the form 20a plus 45b, where a and b themselves are in the normal ring of integers. And in this case, it happens to be that this ideal is equivalent to just 5, containing all of the multiples of 5. Now the reason this occurs is because the normal integers are what's known as a principal ideal domain, which means that any ideal you can think of can be written as a principal one. So if you come at me with the ideal 12, 68, 16, then I could tell you that that's just the ideal 4. So in the integers, if you have an ideal generated by a 0, a 1, all the way up to a n, that's equivalent to a principal ideal generated by the greatest common denominator of all of those elements. But ignore that, that's not how you should be thinking about ideals for now. The way that will be the most helpful to consider ideals is as the smallest possible sets of elements containing the generators that adhere to our two additional conditions. So back we go to z adjoin root minus 5, and we look at some of the ideals we get there. Sure, we get things like 2 and 7 and 4, 6 as we could before, but we also get new funky things like 1 plus square root minus 5. And this one in particular is kind of strange, because whilst the ideal 3 is basically our entire ring times 3, kind of how it was before, the ideal 1 plus root minus 5 looks basically nothing like just multiples, and that's because of the second requirement of an ideal, namely that it quote-unquote absorbs multiplication. If we multiply a generic number by 1 plus root minus 5, we have x plus y root minus 5 times 1 plus root minus 5, and we expand it out and we group the terms, we end up with x minus 5y plus x plus y times the root minus 5. And this element here has to be in the ideal. And what's more, if we equate this expression to a generic form, so we let it equal a plus b root minus 5, we get that b minus a is equal to x plus y minus x minus 5y, which is equal to 6y. But since y is an integer as well from our definition, this means that the ideal actually contains all numbers of the form a plus b root minus 5, where b minus a divides 6. And it's some of these new ideals with the square roots that are ultimately going to help us out, but not before we consider two final concepts. The first one is the idea of the product of two ideals, which is technically defined as the smallest possible ideal containing all elements ij, where I is an element in the ideal I, and j is an element in the ideal j. For principal ideas, this is very simple, you just multiply the generators, and for non-principal ones, you can do a little work to figure it out. The final idea is that of a prime ideal, which is an ideal P such that if AB is in P, that implies that A is in P or B is in P, which you can see is very similar to the definition of a regular prime, but instead of dividing numbers, we're concerned about a number being part of an ideal, being part of a certain set. Okay, so how is all of this going to solve our problem? Well, it's simple. Instead of thinking in terms of numbers, we'll think in terms of ideals. So our statement from before will become the ideal generated by 6 is equal to the ideal generated by 2 times the ideal generated by 3, which is equal to the ideal generated by 1 plus root minus 5 times the ideal generated by 1 minus root minus 5. And the thing about all these ideals is that none of them are prime, and they're all reducible. They're all the product of two different ideals. So I'm going to write them out here for you. These are what these ideals factor into. And if you want to double check, feel free to carry out the multiplication yourself and see that it all adds, well, multiplies up. But what this means is that these two factorizations here are identical at the level of prime ideals. And that's all we're able to do. We're able to have unique factorization of elements into prime ideals, instead of our regular prime numbers. Finally, as a kind of bonus, the number of types of ideals we need to introduce into a ring to restore unique factorization gives us a quantitative measure of how badly a ring fails unique factorization. Now, an ideal is of a different type, depending on what needs to be done to it in order to turn it into a principal ideal, one of those ones generated by just one element. And the reason that this can be used is because in the domains we're working in, which are called Dedekind domains, being a principal ideal domain, so one where every single ideal can always be written as a principal ideal, is equivalent to being a unique factorization domain. This value is referred to as the class number, and for z adjoin root minus 5 it is 2, because all of the new corrective ideals can be squared to become principal ideals. Yeah, there's a lot more interesting maths this way. There are quadratic fields and the Heegner numbers and all manner of whimsical shenanigans that lead on from this, but I am in no way qualified to try and explain them, so this is where I'm throwing in the towel. This is the last video in a trilogy, so if you haven't seen the first two, I strongly recommend you check them out to get some more context for this video, and thanks for watching.